Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're looking at the Maple County Voices. Now this is a truly chilling piece of documented lore about a series of deeply unsettling events that took place in northern Ohio during the brutal winter of 1988. It's this fascinating, terrifying look at how isolation, grief, and the totally unexplained all sort of crash into each other. We're going to break down the timeline, the witness accounts, and the terrifying patterns found in the documents. So let's just start with the calls themselves.
What is absolutely wild about this phenomenon is how consistent it was. These calls weren't explicitly threatening, at least not in the traditional sense. They always arrived after midnight. No caller ID, no static, literally zero background noise, just a dead silent line. Whoever picked up the phone simply heard the incredibly clear, familiar voice of someone they loved who had already died, softly speaking this exact sentence: "I need you to come outside."
Part 1. The winter of 1988. For a while, people just ignored the rumors, but by February of that year, 7 residents of Maple County had completely vanished during these intense snowstorms. Now, officially, the police blame these disappearances on exposure to freezing temperatures, which, makes sense for northern Ohio in a blizzard. But the older locals, they believe something entirely different was walking through the snow, and that brings us to the only survivor who is actually willing to go on the record.
We can track how this horror builds on the night of January 23, 1988. This was during one of the worst snowstorms in decades. We're following a 36-year-old emergency line repairman named Walter Finch. At 11:20 p.m., Walter gets a maintenance request. An isolated farmhouse is reporting a continuously ringing phone, even though the lines are supposed to be disconnected. By midnight, as Walter is driving out there alone, visibility drops to absolute zero. But he notices this really unsettling detail. The telephone poles along the road are leaning at these strange, impossible angles, almost as if they're physically bending towards something hiding in the woods. Finally, at 12:07 a.m., he arrives.
Part 2. The isolated farmhouse. Walter steps into this incredibly bleak scene. The farmhouse looks completely abandoned. There are no lights on, no tire tracks in the snow out front, no smoke coming from the chimney. The inside of the house is freezing cold, and in a terrifyingly quiet detail, every single clock inside the house is completely stopped. The time frozen on their faces, exactly 12:07 a.m., the exact minute he pulled up.
And in all that dead silence, there was just one sound. A single, loud, constant ringing echoing through the frozen house. And it wasn't a modern digital ring either. It was that heavy, mechanical, jarring sound of a really old rotary phone. It was coming from upstairs, so it drew Walter cautiously up the steps and into an abandoned bedroom.
Part 3. Voices from the dead. Walter picks up the receiver, and instantly, the ringing stops. Instead, he hears a soft, warm voice say, "Walter." It was his wife, Eleanor. The crucial, completely haunting detail here is that Eleanor had died of cancer 3 years prior. The voice was perfect. It wasn't some cheap imitation. It was exactly her, whispering, "I'm outside," before the line went completely dead.
But literally 1 second later, the phone rings again. He picks it up, and the dynamic shifts in an instant. Eleanor's voice is no longer warm. She sounds absolutely terrified, and she delivers this chilling warning: "Don't let it see you through the windows."
Walter slowly turns his head to look out the window. Standing outside in the snow is an entity that looks almost human, but its proportions are just entirely wrong. It is incredibly tall, super thin, and its arms are just way too long. Its face is totally pale beneath the storm, and the most terrifying part? It's holding a telephone receiver pressed against its ear, and it's looking right at Walter, smiling.
And then, absolute chaos erupts. Every hidden telephone inside that house begins ringing simultaneously. Downstairs, upstairs, even buried deep inside the walls. Dozens of ringing phones. But the rings don't sound like mechanical bells anymore. They sound desperate, like people trapped somewhere incredibly far away, crying out for help.
The creature outside slowly starts moving closer to the bedroom window. Its pale face stretches open unnaturally wide. The ringing abruptly cuts out, and every single phone hidden throughout the entire house speaks in perfect unison. With Eleanor's voice, they all say, "Please let me in."
Walter completely panics, right? He bolts downstairs, the front door slamming shut behind him. He grabs the main house telephone to call the police, but instead of a dial tone, dozens of voices answer simultaneously, just crying, whispering, begging. And out of that horrific static, one clear voice cuts through. "Dad says the snow people aren't real anymore."
Walter immediately recognizes it. It's Tommy Green, a local boy who had vanished into a snowstorm just 2 weeks earlier. Right after that, the line just fills with screaming.
Part 4. Feeding on grief. Walter violently smashes the phone against the wall. The screaming stops. But the physical threat? It's no longer just outside. Heavy footsteps start echoing on the floorboards above him. He tries the front door, but it's totally blocked. And then, heavy breathing begins at the very end of the dark hallway. Walter grabs a heavy iron fireplace poker and slowly turns around to face the darkness.
And he is met with pure nightmare fuel. The creature is now standing right inside his house at the end of the hallway. It's so tall its head actually scrapes the ceiling. Its body is tightly wrapped in miles of old telephone wire, and you guys, dozens of human mouths are moving beneath its skin, all whispering different names. The creature tilts its head, and Eleanor's voice comes out from somewhere deep inside its chest, saying, "You left me alone." The entity was literally weaponizing Walter's deepest guilt over not being there when his wife died. It feeds on that specific raw grief.
Walter realizes instantly that he cannot fight this thing. His escape is just a blur of absolute panic. Step 1, he runs blindly out the back kitchen door and straight into the blizzard. Step 2, as he's stumbling through the deep freezing snow of the backyard, he has to navigate past dozens of frozen, motionless people standing under the snow, and every single one of them is holding a telephone receiver against their face. Step 3, he finally reaches his truck, barely gets the engine to turn over, and speeds away. He looks in the rearview mirror just in time to see the creature standing in the doorway, still smiling.
Part 5. Uncovered in the snow. As Walter is fleeing across the dark fields, the horror doesn't actually stop. The deafening sound of ringing phones is still following him, but then he realizes the ringing isn't coming from the farmhouse behind him, it's coming from beneath the snow. There are hundreds of telephones buried underground, all ringing at the exact same time.
The next morning, the contrast is just jarring. Walter experienced this incredibly detailed, traumatic encounter. But the official police findings? They show a completely empty farmhouse. No furniture, no electricity, and crucially, absolutely no phone lines hooked up to the property. County records proved nobody had lived there since 1972. The investigators completely dismissed Walter's story, just writing the whole thing off as extreme exhaustion and severe hypothermia, making him hallucinate.
Yet the disappearances around Maple County continued, specifically during heavy snowstorms. Locals kept reporting ringing phones inside disconnected homes and seeing weird figures standing by the road holding old receivers. Then, in 2003, a massive validation of Walter's story actually happens. A utility worker digging in the frozen soil outside Maple County unearths dozens of buried, completely disconnected rotary telephones, which brings us to the year 2025.
But hold on. Before we get to 2025, we have to talk about what happened with those buried phones back in 2003. When the police found them all tangled in the dirt, one of the officers decided to test one of the receivers. He lifted it to his ear, and from that absolutely dead, dirt-filled line, a voice whispered, "Can you hear me now?"
Part 6, the final interview. So it's 2025, and Walter Finch, who is now 73 years old, is finally ready to speak about it again. He's a former Army signal operator and a widower getting ready to enter assisted living. He has refused all interviews for decades. In this session, we learn that he never answered a telephone after midnight again. And even in his old age, he religiously unplugs every single phone in his home before a snowstorm rolls in. Because sometimes, late at night, he still hears Eleanor calling out to him from disconnected lines.
The reporter asked Walter one final, really piercing question. What do you think that thing really was? Walter just stares out at the softly drifting snow in complete silence for a moment. And then he provides this absolutely haunting conclusion. He says, "I think winter keeps the voices of lonely people."
But you guys, the story doesn't end on that quiet, somber note. This is where the real dread sets in. According to the radio producer who recorded this 2025 interview, the exact second Walter Finch stepped out of the studio and into the winter cold, every single telephone in the building rang simultaneously.
It just completely shatters the safety of the present day, right? If grief and isolation are what actually powers these entities, and the winter never truly stops coming back year after year, do the voices ever truly stop calling? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I'm just going to let you sit with that question.